"No," Allison said softly, but the firmness in her tone cut through the chatter like a blade. "Tonight, this table is for him and his dog too." The night was meant to glow. Maple Grove had always been more than a restaurant. It was a heartbeat in the small town of Redwood, a place where winter's edge softened over steaming plates and familiar voices. Thanksgiving night was its crown jewel, and Allison Hart had spent 12 hours orchestrating every detail. The warmth inside was almost tangible. Long, polished tables ran end to end, each topped with autumn centerpieces, gourds, miniature pumpkins, and clusters of crimson leaves. The rich scent of roasted turkey mingled with the sweetness of pumpkin pie cooling near the kitchen doors. Outside, the first snow of the season drifted lazily, each flake catching the golden lamplight before melting on the window glass. Allison, 34, moved through the room with practiced grace. Her brown hair was pulled into a neat bun, her black apron spotless despite the chaos of the day. She knew nearly every guest by name: the Carsons from Willow Street, the Pierce family with their 3 rambunctious boys, Mrs. Delaney, who brought her own cranberry relish every year. Here she was more than a manager. She was part of the town's rhythm. It was just as dessert was being served, pecan pie slices fanning across plates, whipped cream swirled into soft peaks, that the door opened again. A man stepped inside, bringing with him a faint swirl of cold air. His Marine Corps jacket was worn at the edges, its faded olive fabric carrying the kind of creases earned by years, not fashion. Beside him padded a black Labrador in a red vest. White block letters on the vest read, "Service Dog." Allison's eyes softened. Without hesitation, she guided them to a table near the fireplace, the warmest spot in the room. The veteran's shoulders seemed to drop a fraction as the dog curled obediently at his feet. She promised coffee, already turning toward the kitchen, and stopped short. Kevin Blaine, the restaurant's owner, was heading toward the table with a man in a dark suit. The man's badge gleamed. State Health Inspector. "This animal can't be in here," the inspector said loud enough for half the room to hear. His voice was sharp, the kind designed to carry authority by volume alone. "Violation of the health code." Allison kept her tone even. "He's a registered service dog. The law allows him to be here." Kevin frowned, his voice low but edged. "Allie, it's Thanksgiving. Let's not make a scene. Ask them to leave." Her pulse ticked faster, but she stood her ground. She'd seen that look before, the flicker in a veteran's eyes when a crowd became too much. She knew what that dog meant. "No," she said, the single syllable quiet but immovable. "Tonight, this table is for him and his dog too." The inspector's expression tightened, but Kevin's response was worse. His lips pressed into a thin line as he reached into his jacket. "Then you're leaving me no choice." An envelope appeared in his hand. "You're done here," he said, voice cold, delivering the words like a verdict, effective immediately. It happened so fast, the room barely caught up. The chatter faded to a stunned hush. Someone whispered, "That's not right," but no one stood. Allison felt every eye on her as she untied her apron, folded it carefully, and set it on the counter. The scent of cinnamon and coffee swirled around her. As she walked to the door, each step strangely light, as if the floor no longer belonged beneath her feet. Outside, the winter air wrapped around her like glass, cold, brittle. She didn't look back. Snowflakes clung to her hair as the door shut behind her, sealing in the warmth and leaving her alone with the dark. The laughter and clinking glasses inside faded, replaced by the soft crunch of her boots on fresh snow. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 8. She pulled her coat tighter, her breath fogging in the air, the envelope still unopened in her pocket. Somewhere in that dining room, a man sat with his dog by the fire. Somewhere in that room, people had decided silence was easier than standing beside her. But Allison Hart had made her choice, and she would learn soon enough. That choice would change everything. The morning after, Allison didn't sleep. She lay on her couch under the faint glow of the street lamp outside, still wearing the sweater she'd thrown on after walking home. The envelope Kevin had handed her sat on the coffee table, unopened, a quiet insult in plain sight. Her phone was silent. No messages from coworkers, no messages from friends. But somewhere in the world, something was moving without her knowing. Because someone was filming. The grainy video, her calm refusal, the inspector's loud voice, Kevin's flat dismissal, had hit social media before dessert plates were cleared. By dawn, it was on veteran forums, local news pages, and even a few national feeds. In the comments, strangers argued over her choice. Some called her reckless, others called her a hero. Veterans chimed in with stories of their own, times they'd been asked to leave a restaurant, a bus, a store, times the law had been on their side, but the people hadn't been. Allison didn't know any of that yet. The first light of morning slipped through her blinds in pale ribbons, and with it came a sound she didn't expect, a firm, deliberate knock. Not the hesitant rap of a neighbor, not the light tap of a delivery driver. This was heavier, purposeful. She padded to the door, heart ticking faster with each step. When she opened it, the breath caught in her throat. On her small wooden porch stood a man in full dress uniform. Deep blue, gold buttons gleaming, rows of ribbons across his chest. His posture was a study in discipline, the kind that came from decades of command. Flanking him on either side were 6 soldiers in winter coats, their berets angled just so, their boots perfectly aligned on her weather-worn boards. "Miss Hart." His voice was deep, steady. "Yes," she managed. "I'm General Jonathan Marsh, United States Army." He didn't offer a handshake yet, just studied her face with a level gaze, as if weighing something beyond words. "We need to talk." Behind him, the soldiers stood at silent attention. The air between them seemed almost solid, charged with a formality that didn't belong on her quiet street. She stepped aside without thinking. "Come in," she said, her voice smaller than she meant it to be. The general crossed her threshold with the kind of care that made her living room feel suddenly smaller, the soldiers waiting outside like a wall. He stayed standing. "The man you defended last night," he began, "was Major Ray Kramer, retired Marine officer, recipient of the Silver Star and the Navy Cross. He commanded one of the most dangerous rescue operations in Iraq, a mission that was never fully declassified." Allison's pulse thudded in her ears. "The video of you refusing to evict him reached our command this morning. Major Kramer has friends, people who remember what he's done, people who understand what that service dog means." He paused, his eyes catching hers with an intensity that felt like it pinned her in place. "We're starting a new veteran outreach program at Fort Willow. We need someone to run it, not an administrator. Someone who can be trusted by the men and women it's meant for." The words hung in the room like a door swung open to a place she didn't yet recognize. "I don't," she trailed off, still trying to fit herself into the picture he was painting. "I've never worked in the military. Neither had half the people I trust most. This isn't about rank. It's about the fact that you stood your ground when it cost you something." Her mind tried to reach for reasons to say no, fear of failing, of not belonging. But the truth was simpler. She didn't want to walk away from what that table meant. She met his gaze again. "Yes," she said. And just like that, her life turned a corner. 1 week later, she stood in an old army warehouse, the air still tinged with the sharp scent of fresh paint and sawdust, watching as work crews transformed it into something new. She didn't know exactly what it would become yet, but she knew who it would be for. The warehouse was cavernous, its steel rafters disappearing into shadow, the kind of space where sound carried forever. Fluorescent lights flickered high above, catching on the dust still hanging in the air. Half the floor was cluttered with crates and leftover army surplus, folding cots, battered lockers, stacks of mismatched chairs. But in one corner, the transformation had already begun. Freshly painted walls in warm earth tones, a row of mismatched but comfortable couches, a table with a coffee urn steaming beside a basket of mugs. It was hard to picture what it would look like finished, but Allison could already feel what it could become. General Marsh was there that morning, sleeves rolled up, clipboard in hand. He didn't look like the kind of man who oversaw projects from behind a desk. He carried himself like someone who had built things with his own hands. "This will be the lounge," he said, gesturing to the couches. "Over there, art room. Vets who can't put certain things into words, sometimes they can paint them." Allison nodded, imagining canvases lined up along those walls. "And that corner?" His mouth softened into the faintest smile. "Therapy dog station." The image brought a warmth to her chest. She remembered the black Labrador curled at Major Kramer's feet, its presence steadying him more than any human could. The days blurred into a rhythm. Calls to local carpenters, meetings with volunteers, hauling boxes of supplies. Allison wasn't just managing the project, she was learning the shape of it, the way each piece fit into something larger. There were no uniforms here, no salutes, but there was a discipline of a different kind, a shared purpose that didn't need orders to hold it together. On the third afternoon, she was sorting through a shipment of donated furniture when she heard footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate. She turned and froze. Major Ray Kramer stood in the doorway. His Marine Corps jacket was zipped to the chin, the red vest of his service dog bright against the muted colors of the room. The dog padded in first, its nails clicking softly against the concrete floor, and took its place at his side without a command. They regarded each other for a moment. He didn't speak right away, and neither did she. Then, without ceremony, he crossed the room and held out his hand. "Allison Hart," he said quietly, as if making sure the name felt right in his mouth. "Yes, sir." She took his hand, feeling the calluses still on his palm, the grip that was strong without trying to be. He reached into his jacket pocket and drew out a small, square box. Setting it on the desk between them, he pushed it toward her. She opened it. Inside was a tarnished military service tag, worn at the edges, the lettering softened by time. Beneath it lay a folded note on paper so creased it looked as though it had been carried for years. Her eyes dropped to the handwriting. "For reminding me that honor still exists." The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of something irrevocable. She looked back up, her throat too tight to speak. He gave a short nod, then turned and walked out, the dog keeping perfect pace beside him. No speeches, no lingering, just a gift, left in her hands like a torch, passed from one keeper to the next. She stood there for a long moment, the service tag warm against her palm. It wasn't a medal or a plaque, but it felt like the highest honor she'd ever been given. Over the next weeks, the center took shape. The lounge filled with donated armchairs and worn-in sofas, each one softened by countless conversations. The art room began to smell faintly of turpentine and coffee. In the therapy dog corner, a rotation of golden retrievers, shepherds, and labs made their rounds, leaning into the knees of men and women who didn't need to explain why they were there. Veterans started coming in quietly, sometimes just to sit in a chair and watch the snow drift past the big windows. No one asked for stories. No one pressed for details. This was a place for breathing, for belonging. One evening, as Allison was locking up, she paused in the doorway. From the lounge came the low murmur of two men talking, not about combat or loss, but about fishing trips, football scores, the price of good coffee. It was the kind of conversation that might seem ordinary to anyone else, but here, in this place, it was proof that something broken could begin to mend. She locked the door, stepping into the crisp night air, and realized she wasn't just managing a center anymore. She was keeping a promise she hadn't even known she'd made, to hold space for people who had given everything and ask nothing in return. By late January, the Veterans Support Center had a heartbeat. The old warehouse no longer echoed with emptiness. Instead, the air hummed softly with the smell of brewing coffee, the rustle of jackets being shrugged off, the occasional bark of a therapy dog announcing its arrival. The space felt lived in, as though it had been here for years instead of weeks. Allison moved through it with ease of someone who belonged, not because she wore a uniform, but because she carried the trust of the people inside. She'd learned the rhythm. Some veterans came every day, staying from opening to closing, drifting between the art room and the lounge. Others appeared once in a while, like migratory birds, dropping in to warm themselves with coffee and a few unhurried words before disappearing again. No one signed in. No one was asked why they came. She stocked the lounge with blankets and puzzles, kept the art room supplied with brushes and paper, and made sure the therapy dog corner had fresh water bowls and dog treats in the tin marked honors jar. She learned names slowly, sometimes weeks after meeting the person. There was Mitch, a Navy vet who spoke in short, clipped sentences, but carved delicate wooden birds in the art room. Claire, an Air Force mechanic whose laugh could be heard over the hum of the heating station. And then there was Sergeant Deacon, a former Army medic who never sat in the same place twice, always with his back to a wall. The rules here were simple. If someone talked, you listened. If they didn't, you didn't ask. One snowy afternoon, Allison was rearranging chairs in the lounge when she felt a presence beside her. Major Kramer. He hadn't been back since the day he'd given her the service tag. Now he stood in the doorway, his dog, Scout, settling beside him with a sigh. Without a word, he handed her a worn envelope. She opened it to find a faded black and white photo, a group of Marines in desert gear, arms thrown around each other in the kind of embrace that says, "We made it out together." In the center was a much younger Kramer, grinning like the world was still wide open.
"They're all gone now," he said quietly. "But if this place had been around when they came home..." He didn't finish the sentence, just let it hang between them. Allison studied the photo, then looked up. "This place is here now," she said. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that what they were building wasn't just walls and rooms, but a kind of lifeline. Word about the center began to ripple outward. Veterans from nearby towns started showing up. A retired Army captain drove 2 hours just to spend the afternoon in the art room. A Marine who hadn't spoken to anyone outside his family in years spent an entire morning teaching a younger vet how to carve a fishing lure. General Marsh visited often, never in uniform now, just in a heavy wool coat. He would walk through the rooms quietly, stopping to greet each person by name when he could. One afternoon, he lingered in the doorway of the lounge, watching Allison show a new volunteer how to work the coffee urn. "You know," he said when she joined him, "this wasn't supposed to be more than a pilot program." "And now?" she asked. "Now, it's something I'm going to fight to make permanent, maybe even national." He gave her a half smile. "That is, if you're ready to stand on a bigger stage." Allison felt a flicker of hesitation. She had never sought the spotlight. Her strength, she believed, was in keeping the focus on the veterans, not on herself. But she also knew that to protect what they had built, she might have to step into the light, if only for a moment. She nodded. If that's what it takes. And though she didn't know it yet, that choice would carry her all the way to a podium in Washington, to speak for every person who had ever walked through the center's doors in quiet search of belonging. 6 months later, Allison found herself in a place she never could have imagined, the ballroom of a Washington, D.C. hotel, lit by chandeliers that scattered light across rows of polished tables. The National Veterans Conference was underway, the air filled with the low hum of conversation, the clink of silverware against china, the rustle of programs being folded and refolded by attendees waiting for the next speaker. Her name had been printed in the schedule in bold. Allison Hart, Director, Fort Willow Veterans Support Center. She stood backstage, her hands clasped behind her to steady them, listening as the MC introduced her. She wasn't a politician or a decorated officer. She didn't have medals to display or a resume that stretched for pages. What she had was a story, a choice made on a snowy Thanksgiving night in a small-town restaurant, and the unexpected ripple it had sent into the world. When her name was called, she stepped into the light. The audience was a sea of uniforms and civilian clothes, rows of ribbons and lapel pins glinting under the chandeliers. Her heels clicked softly on the stage, but when she reached the podium, the sound seemed to fall away. She looked out, taking a breath that felt like it reached all the way to her toes. "I didn't plan to start a program," she began, her voice steady but warm. "I didn't set out to make a statement or build a center or stand here tonight. I just couldn't tell a man and his service dog to leave." A ripple of quiet recognition moved through the room. She told them about the night, the confrontation, the envelope, and the silence of people who chose not to step forward. She told them about the morning knock on her door, General Marsh's offer, and the transformation of an empty warehouse into a place where veterans could come without fear of being asked why. "And that choice," she said, her voice tightening slightly, "changed my life. More importantly, it changed what was possible for people who had given more than most of us can imagine." She spoke of Mitch's carved birds, of Claire's laugh, of the quiet way Sergeant Deacon had begun sitting closer to the center of the room instead of the far corner. She spoke of the therapy dogs that somehow knew which person in the lounge needed a warm head resting on their knee. "Sometimes," she said, "the most important thing you can do is stay on the side of dignity. Because when you do, you're not just defending one person in one moment. You're defending the idea that respect is not negotiable." When she finished, there was a stillness that felt almost sacred before the applause began. It started in pockets, then swelled until the room was standing. She stepped down from the stage into a blur of handshakes and quiet thank yous, but her mind was already turning toward home. 2 days later, she returned to Fort Willow. The drive from the airport was lined with late summer trees, their leaves just beginning to turn. As she rounded the final bend, she saw something she hadn't expected. People were lining the street, veterans in faded uniforms, families holding homemade signs, children waving small American flags.
The sound of their voices rose in greeting as she slowed the car. Some saluted. Others simply smiled. Near the front of the crowd stood General Marsh, his coat unbuttoned in the warm afternoon sun, and beside him, Major Kramer with Scout sitting alert at his side. The center's front wall had been changed while she was gone. The plain sign that once read Fort Willow Veteran Support Center had been replaced with a new one, the Allison Hart House, where respect is not negotiable. Her throat tightened. She stepped out of the car, and for a moment she didn't move, just took in the sight of it, the sound of it, the weight of what it meant. When she finally crossed the sidewalk toward the door, Scout trotted forward to greet her. Kramer smiled, small, almost shy, and said, "Thought you should see it with everyone here." Inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint. The lounge was as she'd left it, the coffee urn half full, the art room still scattered with brushes and half-finished canvases, but it felt different now, fuller somehow, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the gratitude that had gathered outside. That evening, when the last of the crowd had gone, Allison sat alone in the lounge, the new sign visible through the front window. She thought of the night it had all begun, of the table by the fireplace, the worn Marine Corps jacket, the dog whose steady gaze seemed to hold the room together. She thought of how quickly people could choose silence, and how quickly that silence could be broken when one person decided to stand. The center wasn't about her, not really. It was about the ones who walked through the door needing a place to sit without explanation. But she knew, now, that her part in it mattered. Respect, she realized, was not just something you gave, it was something you guarded. And as long as she was here, it would be guarded well.